I didn't expect to see him again, and certainly not like that. Just walking through the back door one afternoon without calling ahead, carrying a worn backpack and that strange stillness in his face that hadn't been there before. He looked older than I remembered, not just in the way his shoulders filled out or the way his voice had dropped, but in the way he avoided eye contact, like he'd learned to hold things back without needing to explain why. Stephen lit up when he saw Carter, pulled him into a hug like the years between them had vanished, and told him to stay as long as he needed. I stood to the side, smiling politely, trying to hide the discomfort I felt, because something about him felt unfamiliar now, like he was carrying parts of himself I'd never be allowed to see. Later that evening, he stood in the kitchen quietly, sipping water, barely moving, and though I didn't say a word, I watched him from the hallway and knew something had changed, not just in him, but in me too, though I couldn't yet say how. Lately, it feels like Carter is always nearby, though never in a way that feels forced or obvious. He's just there, slipping into the edges of my routines like he's memorized them without ever asking. One morning, I came downstairs to find him already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world, flipping eggs while humming something I didn't recognize. And then he started helping around the house, wordlessly, fixing the leaky faucet that had annoyed me for weeks, folding laundry without being asked, wiping down counters after dinner while Stephen scrolled through his phone, not noticing anything, but the screen. It isn't the things Carter does that unsettle me. It's the way he does them, like he's listening to the silence between the words I'm not saying. On a family walk to the river, Stephen stepped away to take a call, and Carter stayed behind, walking slow with me, taking photos of the trees and the dogs passing by. Later, he asked me to send him a few of the pictures. One of them, just a moment I accidentally caught, where he looked at me and I hadn't looked away fast enough, felt too personal to share, so I didn't. We ran into each other on the roof one afternoon, both pretending to be there for different reasons. He said, he was fixing the light. I said I just needed air, though neither of us really explained what we meant. The wind kept pulling at the edges of my blanket, and when it finally slipped off my shoulders, Carter reached down and handed it back to me without speaking, his hand brushing mine just slightly, just long enough to notice. That silence stretched between us, full of something I couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. A few days later, we had a quiet evening with board games and wine, the kind that usually ended in laughter. But Stephen fell asleep early on the couch, leaving the two of us alone at the table. Carter looked at me across the empty glasses and asked, not casually, not dramatically, just honestly, "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" I didn't even hesitate. "Every day," I said. He leaned in, not much, just enough, and for a second everything stilled. We kissed, quick, unsure, wordless, and then sat back like nothing had happened, though everything suddenly had. We didn't talk about the kiss, didn't even glance at each other any differently the next morning, as if pretending it hadn't happened might make it true. I went back to the usual rhythm, mornings at the shelter, groceries on Wednesdays, laundry on Sundays, but something underneath all of it had shifted. And no matter how I tried to act normal, I could feel the weight of that small, quiet moment hanging between us. Carter didn't avoid me, but he wasn't the same either. He smiled less, lingered less, left rooms quicker than he used to, like he was trying not to create any more silence that we might be tempted to fill. At the weekend market, he walked ahead, busying himself with a vendor's dog, and I thought maybe he was really gone already, until I turned to look for him and found him staring at me from across the aisle. That night, while we sat in the backyard, pretending to watch the stars, he said he was thinking about leaving sooner than planned. I didn't ask him to stay, but I didn't agree with him either. Stephen started calling more often during the day, his voice lighter than usual, asking if I needed anything, if I was okay, if things at home felt normal, though he never said what he really meant. I told him everything was fine, even when I had no idea if that was true anymore. He suggested we spend a weekend at his parents' house to get out of town, but I said no without offering a reason, and he didn't press. Jenna noticed before. Anyone else did. Maybe because she'd always been good at spotting things I wasn't ready to admit. One afternoon, she said, "He's different, you know. You changed him. Just don't act like you don't see it." I snapped back without thinking, said she didn't know what she was talking about, and we haven't spoken since. Later that night, I wrote Carter a letter. Nothing long, just a page of things I wasn't going to say out loud. I folded it, held it in my hands for a while, then burned it behind the shed like that might be enough to undo something. The house felt heavier after that, like even the walls knew what I was trying not to say. One morning, while looking for a charger in the living room, I stumbled across Carter's phone left on the side table, screen still lit with an open note. Just a few lines, nothing addressed to anyone, but raw in a way that made it impossible to unread. It wasn't a confession, but it felt close enough to hurt. He left early the next day, before breakfast, the front door left slightly open as if he couldn't decide whether to close it behind him. Stephen was packing for a work trip, barely noticed Carter's absence, didn't ask where he'd gone until that evening, and even then it sounded more like a passing thought than real concern. I recorded a voice message for Carter that night, sat with it for 20 minutes, listening to my own voice play back like someone I didn't recognize. Then I deleted it without ever hitting send. Stephen sat across from me at dinner, stirring his soup more than eating it, and finally asked if something had been off lately. His tone was gentle, careful, like he already knew but didn't want to hear it from me. I told him I was just tired, which wasn't exactly a lie, but not the kind of truth that matters. The next day, he brought home a small box. Simple earrings, nothing fancy, but chosen with thought, the kind of gift you give when you're trying to reach someone who's slipping away. I thanked him, smiled the way I was supposed to, but I couldn't bring myself to wear them. At work, I submitted a resignation letter without telling anyone, not even fully understanding if I wanted to leave or just needed something, anything, to change. A few days later, Jenna sent me a photo of the letter I thought I'd burned, the one I wrote to Carter. It had somehow ended up in her mailbox, no note, no explanation. She didn't reply, didn't ask questions, and her silence was worse than anything she could have said. Stephen started sleeping in the garage a few nights a week, saying it was quieter out there, less distracting, though neither of us pretended to believe it. I didn't ask questions, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't think I could handle the answers. I tried enrolling in an online course, something about writing or maybe mindfulness. I don't even remember now. But I couldn't get through a single module without closing the laptop and staring at the wall instead. One evening, while organizing the drawer on the porch, I found the photo I'd taken by the river, the one with Carter half smiling beside me, the one I never meant to keep. The corner was singed, like someone had tried to destroy it and stopped halfway. I didn't throw it away. I just slid it back where I found it and closed the drawer slowly. Like maybe that small act would help me believe I hadn't held on to it on purpose. One morning, without thinking, I set 3 plates on the table, muscle memory more than anything, and it wasn't until I reached for the 3rd fork that I realized what I'd done. I stood there for a while, not moving, not cleaning it up, just staring at the space that no longer belonged to anyone. I kept doing the things I was supposed to do, cooking, cleaning, answering emails, but it all felt mechanical, like I was living someone else's day on repeat. Stephen stopped asking how I was or where I'd been, and I stopped pretending I noticed. Out of nowhere, Jenna sent me a voice message, quiet and slow, saying she hoped I was okay, but that I'd broken more. Then I realized. I listened to it once and deleted it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it did, and I didn't want to carry more weight than I already was. There was nothing dramatic anymore, no big arguments, no final scenes, just the kind of silence that feels permanent, like something settling into place that you can't undo. Carter didn't come back, not even for a visit or a forgotten jacket, and eventually even the possibility stopped crossing my mind. Stephen stayed, but it felt more like cohabiting than marriage, two people moving around the same space, careful not to collide. I started rereading old notes I'd left myself in better seasons, grocery lists mixed with ideas, memories scribbled on receipts, and they all felt like they belonged to someone else, someone I wasn't sure I could recognize now. The earrings Stephen gave me stayed in their box for weeks, until one afternoon I put them in a bag with other things for donation, not because I was angry or bitter, but because holding on started to feel heavier than letting go. That evening, I sat alone on the porch without a blanket, without a book, watching the sun disappear behind the trees.